Power. It's the force that has driven empires, crushed rebellions, crowned monarchs, and rewritten the fate of nations. Throughout history, power has never been just about armies or gold. It's been about strategy, charisma, legacy, and sometimes ruthless ambition. But what happens when power becomes a family business? When a dynasty rises not just to rule, but to reshape the very identity of a nation. Across the grand stage of European history, two dynasties played this game better, and more dramatically, than almost anyone else: the Tudors of England and the Bourbons of France. Imagine a time when kings and queens were more than just figureheads. They were the law, the church, the economy, the military, and the ultimate symbol of a nation's pride or downfall. They could ignite wars with a single decision, marry for diplomacy, kill for security, and build legacies so powerful that they're still talked about centuries later. The Tudor and Bourbon dynasties weren't just powerful, they defined what it meant to be powerful. One gave us Henry VIII, who defied the Pope and changed religion forever, and Elizabeth I, who ruled an empire of intellect and intrigue. The other gave us Louis XIV, the Sun King, who turned a palace into a symbol of global dominance, and later, Louis XVI, whose downfall sparked a revolution that changed the world. These families weren't just playing a game of thrones, they were rewriting the rules. Their stories are filled with glory and betrayal, cultural brilliance and political darkness, divine claims and very human flaws. And yet, through it all, they laid the foundations of the modern world as we know it. From the birth of the constitutional monarchy in England to the fiery rise of democracy in post-revolutionary France. But how did they actually do it? How did these dynasties rise from uncertainty to dominate the world stage? What were the secrets behind their control? Was it religion, military might, or manipulation of image and culture? How did art, architecture, and courtly spectacle become tools of authority? And perhaps most fascinating of all, what caused their fall? Was it inevitable? Or could history have turned out very differently? These are the questions we're diving into today. Because understanding the Tudors and Bourbons isn't just about the past. It's about learning how power works in any age. And if you think today's politics are complicated, wait until you hear what went on behind palace doors in the 15th to 18th centuries. Welcome to Words of Time, where history lives, breathes, and tells stories that still matter today. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a journey through time. In this video, we're diving deep into the power game, how the Tudors and Bourbons changed history, exploring the rise, dominance, and legacy of two of Europe's most powerful royal dynasties. From brutal decisions to brilliant diplomacy, from towering palaces to shattered crowns, we'll uncover how these families shaped the world, and why their stories still echo in the halls of modern power. The Tudors and the Bourbons stand as two of the most iconic royal dynasties in European history, their legacies reverberating across centuries of political, cultural, and social development. Emerging from the tumultuous backdrop of civil unrest and dynastic struggles, both houses rose to prominence during transformative periods for their respective nations. While the Tudors reigned over England from the late 15th century to the early 17th century, the Bourbons commanded influence over France and, at times, Spain and other territories from the late 16th century onward. Though separated by geography and national identity, these dynasties offer fascinating parallels and sharp contrasts in the ways they acquired, exercised, and sustained power. Their respective narratives provide a compelling lens through which to understand how royal families molded statecraft, religious authority, military might, and cultural identity in early modern Europe. The House of Tudor emerged from the bloody struggle known as the Wars of the Roses, a series of civil wars for control of the English throne between the houses of Lancaster and York. The conflict reached its conclusion in the year 1485 when Henry Tudor defeated King Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field. Ascending the throne as King Henry VII, he founded the Tudor dynasty and began the process of consolidating power, healing a fractured nation, and establishing a more centralized monarchy. His marriage to Elizabeth of York symbolically united the rival houses, thereby legitimizing his rule and creating a foundation of stability that enabled future monarchs to build upon. The Tudors ruled England for a little over 100 years, from the reign of Henry VII to the death of Elizabeth I in the year 1603. During this relatively brief period, they dramatically transformed the English state, laying the groundwork for the modern British nation. Henry VIII, son of Henry VII, is perhaps the most infamous Tudor monarch. His reign was marked by the English Reformation, a seismic religious shift that saw England break from the authority of the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope. Henry's decision to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon led to the creation of the Church of England, over which he established himself as supreme head. This move not only centralized religious power in the hands of the monarch, but also allowed him to appropriate vast wealth and land from dissolved monasteries. Following Henry VIII's death in 1547, his 3 children would successively occupy the throne. Edward VI, a devout Protestant, reigned briefly and was followed by Mary I, a staunch Catholic known for her attempts to restore Catholicism in England and her persecution of Protestants. Her death paved the way for Elizabeth I, one of the most celebrated monarchs in English history. Her reign, often referred to as the Elizabethan era, was marked by political stability, flourishing arts, maritime exploration, and the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. Elizabeth's skillful navigation of religious tensions, her charisma, and her refusal to marry cemented her legacy as a powerful and independent ruler. The Tudor approach to power was characterized by strong personal monarchy, astute use of propaganda, and a keen awareness of the importance of public image. The monarch's presence was central to governance, with royal progresses, elaborate court rituals, and carefully managed portraits reinforcing the majesty and authority of the crown. The Tudors also invested heavily in building state institutions that could enforce royal will, from the expansion of the Privy Council to the development of a more professional bureaucracy. Though their rule ended with Elizabeth's death without an heir, their impact on the English monarchy and nation was profound and enduring. In contrast, the House of Bourbon rose to prominence in France during a period of religious strife and political fragmentation. Descended from a cadet branch of the Capetian dynasty, the Bourbons began to assert themselves in the 16th century, eventually taking the throne with the accession of Henry IV in 1589. Henry, originally a Protestant leader of the Huguenots during the French Wars of Religion, converted to Catholicism to secure his rule, famously declaring that Paris is well worth a Massachusetts. His pragmatic approach to governance and the Edict of Nantes, which granted limited religious freedom to Protestants, helped to stabilize a fractured realm. Henry IV's reign marked the beginning of a Bourbon dynasty that would dominate French politics until the Revolution at the end of the 18th century. His successors, notably Louis XIII and Louis XIV, built upon his foundations to transform France into a powerful centralized state. Under Louis XIII, the influential Cardinal Richelieu acted as chief minister, pursuing policies aimed at curbing the power of the nobility and reinforcing royal authority. This trend toward absolutism reached its zenith under Louis XIV, the so-called Sun King, who ruled for over 70 years and is widely considered the epitome of an absolute monarch. Louis XIV's reign, from 1643 to 1715, was marked by unprecedented centralization of power. He famously declared, "L'état c'est moi," I am the state, encapsulating his belief in the divine right of kings and the fusion of his personal will with that of the nation. He moved the royal court to the opulent palace of Versailles, a symbol of monarchical grandeur and control over the nobility. Through elaborate rituals, court etiquette, and patronage, Louis kept the aristocracy closely tied to the crown, reducing their capacity for independent action. He also pursued aggressive military campaigns aimed at expanding French territory and influence, though these often came at great financial cost. The Bourbons placed significant emphasis on religious uniformity, with Louis XIV revoking the Edict of Nantes in 1685, leading to renewed persecution of Protestants. This decision, while reinforcing Catholic orthodoxy, also resulted in economic and social consequences as many skilled Huguenots fled the country. Nevertheless, Louis's reign left a lasting mark on French culture, art, architecture, and governance. The model of absolutism he perfected became a reference point for other European monarchs, even as it sowed the seeds of future discontent among a population burdened by taxation and excluded from political participation. Comparing the Tudors and the Bourbons offers valuable insight into different models of dynastic power and state-building. The Tudors ruled in a relatively compact kingdom where the monarch's authority could be more directly asserted over both nobles and commoners. They relied on a combination of legal reforms, religious realignment, and strategic marriages to consolidate their power. The English Reformation, initiated by Henry VIII and institutionalized by his successors, not only redefined the religious landscape of the nation, but also enhanced the monarch's control over spiritual and temporal matters. The Bourbons, by contrast, governed a much larger and more diverse kingdom, requiring more complex administrative structures. The scale of France, its regional diversity, and the power of its traditional aristocracy presented greater challenges to central authority. Bourbon monarchs addressed these through bureaucratic expansion, religious conformity, and a court culture that emphasized hierarchy and spectacle. The use of Versailles as both a residence and a political tool exemplifies how the Bourbons used physical space to reinforce monarchical dominance. Both dynasties also leveraged cultural production to reinforce their legitimacy and project their vision of rulership. The Tudors sponsored writers, artists, and architects who helped craft an image of regal magnificence and divine favor. Elizabeth I, for instance, became the subject of numerous portraits that presented her as a virgin queen, married to her country, and divinely appointed to rule. The Bourbons, particularly under Louis XIV, turned cultural patronage into a cornerstone of state policy. The establishment of royal academies, support for classical French drama, and the construction of grand buildings were all part of an effort to portray the king as the ultimate arbiter of taste and power. The different religious policies pursued by the two dynasties also shaped their legacy. The Tudors' break with Rome and subsequent oscillations between Catholicism and Protestantism created deep divisions in English society, yet also laid the foundation for a national church and a sense of English exceptionalism. The Bourbons' insistence on Catholic uniformity in France helped to strengthen the monarchy's alliance with the Church, but alienated significant segments of the population and stifled religious diversity. In terms of foreign policy, both dynasties were deeply engaged in the geopolitical rivalries of their time. The Tudors, especially under Elizabeth I, skillfully navigated alliances and enmities to enhance England's standing, most notably by supporting Protestant causes in Europe and confronting Spanish power. The Bourbons, meanwhile, pursued more expansionist and militaristic aims, seeking to extend French influence through wars and dynastic marriages. This often led to prolonged conflicts, such as the War of the Spanish Succession, which strained the kingdom's resources and exposed the limits of absolutist ambition. Despite their many differences, both dynasties exemplify the ways in which monarchs adapted to and shaped the conditions of early modern statecraft. The Tudors used religion, legal authority, and personal charisma to consolidate power within a relatively unified kingdom. The Bourbons, ruling over a larger and more fragmented realm, relied on bureaucratic control, cultural hegemony, and an elaborate court to sustain their dominance. In both cases, the monarch was the linchpin of political authority, embodying the unity of the state and the continuity of its institutions. The end of these dynasties also reflected broader historical transformations. The Tudor line ended peacefully with the accession of the Stuart dynasty, though subsequent conflicts, such as the English Civil War, would challenge the very foundations of monarchical rule. The Bourbon dynasty, by contrast, was violently interrupted by the French Revolution, a cataclysmic event that swept away centuries of royal privilege and altered the course of European history. Though the Bourbons would be briefly restored in the 19th century, the age of absolute monarchy had definitively passed. Studying the Tudors and Bourbons allows us to appreciate not only the personalities and policies of individual rulers, but also the structural and ideological forces that shaped early modern governance. Their stories reveal how dynastic ambition, religious conviction, cultural production, and political innovation intertwined to produce enduring models of power. Even today, their legacies continue to fascinate historians, artists, and the public, offering timeless lessons on the nature of leadership and the complexities of authority. Firstly, the Tudor power. In the grand tapestry of English history, the Tudor dynasty stands as one of its most defining threads. A brief yet transformative period that altered the nation's political, religious, and cultural trajectory. The dynasty, which ruled England from the late 15th century to the early 17th century, produced some of the most compelling and influential monarchs the country has ever known. The rise and eventual fall of this dynasty was shaped not by sheer coincidence or unchallenged inheritance, but by the strategic brilliance, political finesse, and at times ruthless decisions of its rulers. Among them, Henry VII, Henry VIII, and Elizabeth I each played a pivotal role in both securing the crown and transforming the English realm. Their reigns marked the evolution of royal power, the redefinition of religious allegiance, and the flowering of national identity. The Tudor narrative begins in the aftermath of one of England's most destructive civil conflicts, the Wars of the Roses. This protracted struggle between the houses of Lancaster and York had left the English nobility decimated, the monarchy weakened, and the kingdom in desperate need of stability. Into this volatile environment stepped Henry Tudor, a relatively obscure claimant to the throne from the Lancastrian line. In the year 1485, Henry defeated King Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field, bringing the Plantagenet dynasty to an end and establishing himself as King Henry VII. Henry VII's claim to the throne was tenuous at best. His ancestry traced back to an illegitimate line through his mother, Margaret Beaufort, and his father's claim as a Welsh nobleman provided little comfort to those accustomed to strong hereditary succession. Aware of the fragility of his position, Henry employed an extraordinary level of political skill and cautious maneuvering to consolidate his rule. One of his first acts as king was to marry Elizabeth of York, thereby uniting the warring houses and presenting an image of reconciliation. The union of Lancaster and York through their marriage became a foundational symbol of peace, visually represented in the Tudor rose, a fusion of the red and white roses of the respective houses. Beyond symbolic gestures, Henry VII worked tirelessly to fortify his authority. He made strategic use of royal finances, increasing revenue through feudal dues, fines, and the efficient administration of crown lands. His meticulous attention to the exchequer helped stabilize the monarchy's economic base, reducing its dependency on parliament and wealthy nobles. Moreover, Henry established the Court of Star Chamber, a judicial body designed to curb the power of overmighty subjects and enforce law and order without the interference of traditional aristocratic courts. These initiatives not only increased royal authority but also sent a clear message. The monarchy was no longer at the mercy of noble factions. Henry's foreign policy was similarly calculated. He arranged beneficial marriage alliances, most notably that of his eldest son Arthur to Catherine of Aragon, daughter of the Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella. Though Arthur's premature death would upend these plans, the alliance itself underscored Henry's desire to place England on the European stage through diplomacy rather than war. By the time of his death in the year 1509, Henry VII had successfully transformed the crown into a source of centralized authority, leaving behind a stronger, more stable kingdom for his successors. It was his second son, Henry VIII, who would become one of the most iconic and controversial monarchs in English history. Ascending the throne in 1509, Henry VIII inherited his father's firm grip on power, but possessed a vastly different temperament. Where Henry VII had been cautious and reserved, his son was charismatic, impulsive, and driven by a personal vision of glory. Initially celebrated for his youthful vigor and Renaissance ideals, Henry soon became the architect of one of the most significant religious transformations in English history, the English Reformation. At the heart of this transformation was Henry's desire to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon after she failed to produce a male heir. The Pope's refusal to grant the annulment, due in large part to pressure from Catherine's nephew, Emperor Charles V, prompted Henry to take unprecedented action. He rejected papal authority and declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, thereby initiating a complete break from the Roman Catholic Church. This bold move, formalized through the Act of Supremacy in 1534, allowed Henry to annul his own marriage and subsequently wed Anne Boleyn. The establishment of the Church of England was not merely a personal solution to a dynastic problem. It was a revolutionary reconfiguration of religious and political power. With the monarch now serving as both spiritual and temporal leader, the traditional balance of power was upended. Henry dissolved monasteries across England, appropriating their wealth and lands to strengthen the crown's finances and reduce the influence of the Catholic Church. The resulting redistribution of property also created a new class of landowners loyal to the Tudor regime, further cementing royal authority. However, these reforms were not without turmoil. The sudden shifts in religious practice provoked widespread unrest, most notably the Pilgrimage of Grace in the north, a large-scale rebellion by those who remained loyal to traditional Catholicism. Henry responded with ruthless suppression, demonstrating his willingness to use force to uphold his vision of sovereign power. Despite his erratic behavior and the eventual execution of several of his wives and advisors, Henry retained the loyalty of key figures in his court and established a precedent for strong monarchical control over religious affairs. Henry VIII's reign was also marked by ambitious foreign campaigns and extravagant court life, both of which placed significant strain on the royal treasury. Nonetheless, his reign fundamentally altered the relationship between the English crown, the church, and the people. By the time of his death in 1547, Henry had married 6 times, executed 2 of his wives, and fathered 3 legitimate heirs, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, each of whom would rule England in turn. Following Henry's death, the succession passed to his only legitimate son, Edward VI, a devout Protestant who ruled from 1547 to 1553. His brief reign saw the further entrenchment of Protestant reforms, including the introduction of the Book of Common Prayer. However, Edward's frail health and premature death plunged the nation into further uncertainty, leading to the ascension of his half-sister Mary I. Mary, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, sought to reverse the Protestant reforms of her father and brother, restoring Catholicism as the state religion. Her marriage to Philip II of Spain and her campaign of persecution against Protestants earned her the nickname Bloody Mary. During her short reign from 1553 to 1558, hundreds of Protestants were burned at the stake, and the country was once again thrown into religious turmoil. Though devout in her faith, Mary failed to secure an heir, and upon her death the throne passed to her half-sister Elizabeth. Elizabeth I, daughter of Henry VIII and Boleyn, inherited a nation deeply divided by religion, threatened by foreign enemies, and wary of further dynastic conflict. Her reign, which lasted from 1558 to 1603, is often remembered as a golden age of English history, marked by cultural flourishing, maritime expansion, and political stability. Yet Elizabeth's success was not predestined. It was the product of exceptional political acumen and an uncanny ability to maintain control in an age of shifting alliances and dangerous rivalries. One of Elizabeth's most remarkable achievements was her ability to establish a moderate religious settlement that sought to appease both Protestant and Catholic factions. The Elizabethan religious settlement, enacted through the Act of Supremacy and the Act of Uniformity, reasserted the monarch's authority over the Church of England while incorporating elements designed to reduce sectarian tensions. Though England was officially Protestant, the settlement allowed for a degree of ambiguity in practice, helping to avoid the kind of bloody persecution that had marred Mary's reign. Elizabeth's unmarried status became both a personal and political tool. While many urged her to marry and produce an heir, she skillfully used her position as the Virgin Queen to maintain autonomy and avoid entangling alliances. Marriage negotiations with various European princes served as diplomatic leverage, but none culminated in a union. By presenting herself as wedded to her country, Elizabeth cultivated an image of national unity and divine ordination. Her refusal to marry also prevented any foreign prince or English noble from gaining undue influence over the crown. Perhaps the most defining moment of Elizabeth's reign was the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. Faced with an invasion by one of the most powerful naval forces in the world, Elizabeth's navy, bolstered by unfavorable weather for the Spanish, delivered a stunning victory. The defeat of the Armada not only secured England's independence from Catholic domination, but also enhanced Elizabeth's reputation as a capable and divinely favored ruler. Her famous speech to the troops at Tilbury, in which she declared, "I have the heart and stomach of a king," remains one of the most iconic affirmations of monarchical resolve in English history. Under Elizabeth, the English Renaissance blossomed. Writers such as William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Edmund Spenser produced works that enriched the cultural life of the nation and helped forge a distinct English identity. Advances in navigation and exploration, led by figures such as Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh, expanded England's presence on the global stage. The beginnings of English colonization efforts also took root during her reign, setting the stage for future imperial expansion. Despite her many triumphs, Elizabeth's reign was not without challenges. Religious dissent persisted, particularly among Puritans and Catholics. Threats of assassination and rebellion, often tied to Mary Queen of Scots and other foreign Catholic powers, forced Elizabeth to navigate a web of espionage and political intrigue. The execution of Mary Queen of Scots in 1587 was a particularly fraught decision, balancing the threat of Catholic plots against the dangers of martyrdom and retaliation. Elizabeth also faced economic difficulties, including inflation, poor harvests, and social unrest. Yet through careful management and the support of skilled advisors such as William Cecil and Francis Walsingham, she maintained relative stability. Her ability to adapt, communicate effectively with Parliament, and manage her public image was crucial to her longevity and success as a monarch. When Elizabeth died in the year 1603, the Tudor dynasty came to an end, as she left no direct heir. The throne passed to James VI of Scotland, son of Mary, Queen of Scots, who became James I of England and began the Stuart dynasty. Though the Tudors reigned for just over a century, their legacy endured in the transformed structures of church and state, the flowering of national culture, and the emergence of England as a formidable European power. The rise and fall of the Tudors reveal the complexities of power, the impact of personal decisions on national destiny, and the ways in which charisma, ideology, and circumstance shape history. From Henry VII's careful consolidation of authority, to Henry VIII's religious revolution, to Elizabeth I's age of enlightenment and resilience, the Tudor monarchs left an indelible mark on the English consciousness. Their story is one of ambition and adaptation, conflict and creativity, a testament to the enduring influence of dynastic leadership on the fate of a nation. Now we will know about the Bourbon power. The Bourbon dynasty, one of the most powerful royal houses in European history, played a pivotal role in shaping the political, cultural, and ideological landscape of France from the late 16th century into the modern era. Emerging from a turbulent background marked by religious wars and civil unrest, the Bourbons rose to prominence by consolidating power and establishing a centralized, absolute monarchy. Their rule, defined by opulence, ambition, and a relentless pursuit of authority, was embodied most vividly in the reign of Louis XIV, the so-called Sun King. His vision of monarchy, rooted in divine right and royal grandeur, transformed France into the most powerful nation on the continent. Yet, the very structure that the Bourbons constructed to solidify their rule would eventually become a prison of contradiction, unable to withstand the tides of economic hardship, Enlightenment thought, and growing demands for liberty and equality. From the golden age of absolutism to the revolutionary fervor that dismantled it, the story of Bourbon power is one of both unmatched dominance and spectacular collapse. In the 16th century, France had endured a prolonged period of instability. The wars of religion between Catholics and Huguenots had fractured the nation, leading to widespread violence and political fragmentation. It was against this backdrop that Henry IV, the first Bourbon king, ascended the throne in the year 1589. Though born a Protestant, Henry famously converted to Catholicism to gain the support of his subjects, reportedly declaring that Paris is worth a mass. His pragmatic approach to governance was encapsulated in the Edict of Nantes, issued in 1598, which granted religious tolerance to Huguenots and helped bring an end to decades of conflict. This act of religious diplomacy set the tone for Bourbon statecraft, strategic, calculated, and focused on consolidating royal authority. The groundwork laid by Henry IV was continued by his successors, most notably Louis XIII and his chief minister, Cardinal Richelieu. Richelieu's tenure saw the aggressive centralization of power, the weakening of noble autonomy, and the strengthening of the monarchy's administrative reach. He worked to suppress dissent, limit the influence of the Habsburgs, and assert France's dominance on the European stage. His efforts laid the foundation for the emergence of absolute monarchy, a system in which the king claimed supreme authority over all aspects of governance, unrestrained by traditional checks or representative bodies. This vision reached its fullest expression under Louis XIV, who began his personal rule in the year 1661 following the death of Cardinal Mazarin. Louis, who had experienced the chaos of the Fronde Rebellion during his youth, was determined to eliminate any challenges to his authority. Declaring himself the state with the famous phrase, "I am the state," Louis pursued a doctrine of absolutism that placed the monarch at the center of political, social, and cultural life. He ruled without a chief minister, demanding loyalty directly from his subjects and making the court the primary locus of power. Central to Louis's strategy was the creation of the Palace of Versailles, an architectural marvel located approximately 12 miles from Paris. Begun in the year 1664 and expanded over the following decades, Versailles was not merely a royal residence, but a meticulously crafted instrument of governance. The king relocated the nobility from their traditional power bases to his court, where they were subject to elaborate rituals, constant surveillance, and the seductions of royal favor. Through a complex system of patronage, Louis neutralized the aristocracy as a political threat, transforming them into ornamental courtiers dependent on his goodwill. Versailles also served as a showcase of France's cultural supremacy. Art, music, theater, and fashion flourished under Louis's patronage, with artists and intellectuals working to glorify the monarchy and project an image of divine grandeur. The court's rigid hierarchy and ceremonial etiquette mirrored the broader structure of absolute rule, reinforcing the idea that all power emanated from the king. Institutions such as the Académie Française were established to regulate language and culture, ensuring that the monarchy maintained control over not just politics, but also the national identity. Louis's domestic policies were matched by ambitious military and foreign endeavors. He engaged in a series of wars, including the War of Devolution, the Franco-Dutch War, the War of the League of Augsburg, and the War of the Spanish Succession, aimed at expanding French territory and influence. While initially successful, these campaigns placed immense strain on the economy and led to growing discontent among the population. Tax burdens increased, rural peasants suffered under the weight of conscription and inflation, and the seeds of resentment began to take root. Despite these challenges, Louis remained a symbol of stability and grandeur until his death in the year 1715. His reign, which lasted 72 years, the longest in European history at the time, marked the zenith of Bourbon absolutism. However, the very mechanisms that upheld this system, centralized authority, rigid social hierarchies, and the marginalization of dissent, also made it brittle. When faced with new intellectual currents and growing demands for reform, the Bourbon monarchy proved increasingly incapable of adaptation. Following the death of Louis XIV, the crown passed to his great-grandson, Louis XV. Though he inherited a powerful state, Louis XV lacked the vision and decisiveness of his predecessor. His reign, which lasted from 1715 to 1774, was marked by political stagnation, economic difficulty, and the erosion of royal prestige. Corruption at court, mismanagement of finances, and costly wars, including the 7 Years' War, further undermined the monarchy's credibility. The once mighty edifice of Bourbon power began to show signs of decay. During this period, the Enlightenment emerged as a transformative intellectual movement. Thinkers such as Voltaire, Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Diderot began to question the foundations of monarchy, privilege, and religious orthodoxy. They championed reason, individual rights, and the social contract, arguing for more just and rational systems of governance. Their works circulated widely, reaching both the educated elite and the broader public. Salons, pamphlets, and encyclopedias became vehicles for new ideas, eroding the ideological foundations of absolutism. The monarchy attempted to respond to these challenges with limited reforms. Under Louis XVI, who ascended the throne in 1774, there were early efforts to address fiscal imbalances and modernize the administration. Advisors like Turgot and Necker sought to reduce debt, streamline taxation, and promote economic liberalization. However, these efforts were often met with resistance from entrenched interests, particularly the nobility and clergy, who were reluctant to surrender their privileges. The parliaments, regional judicial bodies, also resisted reforms, positioning themselves as defenders of traditional rights against royal overreach. As financial crises deepened, the king was eventually forced to convene the Estates General in 1789, a representative assembly that had not met in over 175 years. The Estates General was composed of 3 estates: the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners. However, tensions quickly escalated when the Third Estate, the commoners, broke away to form the National Assembly, asserting their right to represent the nation's general will. This act marked the beginning of the French Revolution. The revolution exposed the structural weaknesses of Bourbon absolutism. The king's authority was increasingly challenged by popular movements, radical ideas, and demands for a constitutional government. The storming of the Bastille, the abolition of feudal privileges, and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen all signaled a profound shift in the balance of power. The monarchy, once seen as divinely ordained and invulnerable, now appeared vulnerable and outdated. Louis XVI, caught between reform and reaction, vacillated in his response. His attempted flight to Varennes in 1791 shattered public trust and solidified perceptions of the king as an enemy of the revolution. Despite attempts to establish a constitutional monarchy, tensions continued to escalate. By 1792, the monarchy was abolished altogether, and the king was placed on trial for treason. In January of the following year, Louis was executed by guillotine, followed by his wife Marie Antoinette in October. The fall of the Bourbon monarchy marked a turning point not just in French history, but in the history of monarchy itself. For centuries, the Bourbons had claimed legitimacy through tradition, divine right, and centralized control. Yet these very claims had made them inflexible, unable to accommodate the sweeping changes demanded by Enlightenment thinkers and revolutionary movements. The French Revolution introduced new political ideologies, republicanism, liberalism, and later socialism, that would reshape European politics for generations to come. In the years that followed, France would experience a series of radical transformations. The rise and fall of the First Republic, the reign of Napoleon Bonaparte, the restoration of the Bourbons under Louis XVIII and Charles X, and eventually the establishment of constitutional monarchy and republics. Each of these phases bore the imprint of the Bourbon legacy, whether in the form of institutional structures, cultural memory, or the deep scars of conflict and reform. Yet the Bourbon story does not end simply with decline and defeat. The dynasty's reign had left an indelible mark on France and Europe. Under Louis XIV, France became the cultural and political model for absolutist rule, influencing courts from Spain to Russia. The architectural grandeur of Versailles, the patronage of the arts, and the centralized administration became emblems of statecraft. Even as Enlightenment thinkers critiqued the monarchy, they often did so within the intellectual context that had been fostered by Bourbon patronage of learning and scholarship. Moreover, the contradictions within Bourbon rule, the coexistence of grandeur and oppression, centralization and stagnation, reform and resistance, served as catalysts for modern political thought. The very excesses of the monarchy provided Enlightenment thinkers with the evidence they needed to advocate for new forms of governance. In this sense, the Bourbon dynasty, even in its decline, played an essential role in the birth of modern political consciousness. The transition from absolutism to reform, and from monarchy to revolution, was not simply a narrative of loss but one of transformation. It revealed the limits of traditional power in an age of reason and demonstrated the capacity of ordinary citizens to demand accountability and change. While the Bourbons may have sought to freeze time in the gilded mirrors of Versailles, history moved inexorably forward, propelled by ideas and ideals that could not be contained. The arc of Bourbon power, from the rise of absolutism under the Sun King to the collapse of monarchy amid revolutionary upheaval, is a tale of ambition, splendor, and eventual reckoning. The dynasty's achievements in state-building, cultural patronage, and administrative innovation were monumental. Yet, their inability to reconcile the rigid structures of monarchy with the evolving demands of society ultimately led to their downfall. The French Revolution did not merely topple a dynasty. It redefined the very notion of power and legitimacy, ushering in a new era in which the people, rather than the crown, would claim sovereignty. The legacy of the Bourbons, in all its complexity, remains a powerful testament to the enduring interplay between authority, ideology, and the human desire for freedom. Now we will explain some similarities and differences among two. The Tudor and Bourbon dynasties, though emerging in distinct geopolitical and cultural contexts, were both formidable examples of monarchical power at its peak. Each dynasty navigated a world of shifting alliances, religious upheaval, military conflicts, and social change. While their strategies in consolidating and maintaining power often bore similarities, rooted in the fundamental logic of monarchy, their expressions of authority, cultural outlooks, and approaches to governance varied in compelling ways. Examining their methods through the lenses of religion, legal authority, military strength, cultural patronage, and monarchical self-conception offers a nuanced understanding of dynastic rule in early modern Europe. Both the Tudors and the Bourbons employed religion as a foundational pillar of their rule, though they did so under markedly different circumstances and to differing ends. For the Tudors, the most dramatic shift came during the reign of Henry VIII. When the Pope refused to annul Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, the English monarch broke from the Roman Catholic Church and established the Church of England, declaring himself its supreme head. This act in the year 1534 marked a seismic shift in both religious and political authority. No longer was the English crown subservient to a foreign religious institution. It now claimed both temporal and spiritual leadership within its realm. Religion, in this context, was not merely a belief system, but a potent tool of national sovereignty and royal supremacy. Henry used the Reformation not only to justify his divorce, but also to seize church lands, enrich the crown, and quash opposition, most notably in his suppression of the monasteries. Religion became deeply intertwined with English nationalism and loyalty to the monarch. In contrast, the Bourbon approach to religion, especially under Louis XIV, was to align the monarchy ever more closely with Catholic orthodoxy. Louis positioned himself as the eldest son of the Church and reinforced the image of divine right monarchy, wherein the king was God's chosen representative on earth. The revocation of the Edict of Nantes in the year 1685, which had granted limited toleration to French Protestants, signaled a deliberate shift toward religious uniformity. This policy aimed not only to strengthen the unity of the realm, but to assert that deviation from the state-sanctioned faith was a challenge to royal authority. In France, the church and monarchy worked hand in glove, reinforcing each other's legitimacy. The clergy were often key allies of the Bourbon kings, especially in propagating the sanctity and divine origin of royal power. Where the Tudors used religion to fracture old bonds and assert independence, the Bourbons used it to consolidate and sanctify tradition. Law and legal reform offered another avenue through which both dynasties exercised control and established order. The Tudor monarchs invested heavily in legal centralization. Henry VII, the founder of the dynasty, curbed the power of overmighty nobles through legal mechanisms like bonds and recognizances, financial instruments that bound the aristocracy to loyal behavior. The King's Council evolved into the Court of Star Chamber, which operated outside the usual judicial norms and became an effective tool for enforcing royal will. Under Elizabeth I, the common law system was further codified and professionalized, helping to create a unified legal framework across the kingdom. In Tudor England, the law was an extension of the monarch's justice and a means of ensuring stability in a country emerging from civil war. The Bourbons, too, centralized legal authority, but within a different framework. France, unlike England, did not have a unified legal code, but operated under a complex patchwork of customary and Roman laws. The Bourbon kings worked to standardize and centralize this legal apparatus. Royal edicts became the primary source of legislation, issued directly by the monarch without the need for parliamentary approval. Under Louis XIV, the development of the Code Louis, a compilation of civil law for use throughout France, signaled an effort to harmonize the legal landscape under royal supervision. Royal intendants, provincial officials appointed by the crown, were tasked with implementing royal law in the provinces, bypassing local parliaments and noble jurisdictions. Both dynasties thus used the law to assert control, but where the Tudors worked through the evolution of existing legal traditions, the Bourbons imposed legal uniformity through direct royal fiat. Military strength was another cornerstone of both dynasty strategies. The Tudors inherited a kingdom traumatized by the Wars of the Roses, a brutal series of dynastic conflicts that left the monarchy weakened and unstable. Henry VII deliberately avoided large-scale foreign engagements and focused on strengthening internal security. He maintained a modest standing army and relied heavily on diplomacy and dynastic marriages to secure peace. Henry VIII reversed this cautious policy by engaging in costly wars in France and Scotland, but these adventures yielded limited gains and strained royal finances. By Elizabeth's reign, England had embraced a more naval-centered military strategy, exemplified in the defeat of the Spanish Armada in the year 1588. This triumph, while rooted in both tactical skill and luck, cemented England's status as a rising maritime power and bolstered the mythos of Elizabethan rule. In contrast, the Bourbons, especially under Louis XIV, pursued military expansion as a central tenet of state policy. Louis waged numerous wars with the aim of asserting French dominance in Europe and expanding territorial claims. The king maintained a vast standing army, one of the largest in Europe, and invested heavily in military infrastructure, training, and logistics. The creation of a centralized war ministry and the use of professional soldiers transformed France into a formidable military machine. These wars, while enhancing France's power and prestige, also contributed to massive debt and widespread social suffering, laying the groundwork for later discontent. The Bourbons used the military as both an external tool of conquest and an internal guarantor of order, reinforcing the centrality of the monarch in both peace and war. Cultural patronage was a defining feature of both dynasties, and it served as a potent means of legitimizing rule and shaping national identity. The Tudors presided over what is often described as the English Renaissance, a flourishing of literature, drama, music, and visual arts. Elizabeth I in particular cultivated an image of herself as a patron of learning and the arts. The works of William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, Edmund Spenser, and others contributed to a cultural golden age that celebrated both the monarch and the nation. Elizabeth's image was carefully managed through portraiture, court pageantry, and the circulation of poetry, often depicting her as the Virgin Queen, a symbol of purity, wisdom, and divine favor. The court became a center not only of power, but of artistic and intellectual life. The Bourbons similarly understood the political utility of culture. Louis XIV's court at Versailles was not merely a residence, but a theater of power. The architecture, decoration, and ceremonies of Versailles projected an image of grandeur, stability, and divine favor. Louis patronized artists, composers, playwrights, and architects who glorified his reign. Figures like Molière, Lully, and Lebrun were instrumental in creating a distinctively French classical style that emphasized harmony, order, and majesty. The Académie Française and other royal institutions were established to regulate and promote culture under royal auspices. Art and literature were tools of statecraft, designed to reinforce the image of the king as both the guardian and embodiment of civilization. Yet, there were differences in how these dynasties viewed the personal role of the monarch in the exercise of power. For the Tudors, particularly under Elizabeth, the monarch was both a political actor and a symbolic figure. Elizabeth skillfully balanced her authority with the appearance of council and consensus, maintaining the illusion of partnership with Parliament while ensuring that real power remained in royal hands. Her unmarried status and cultivation of a personal mystique allowed her to become a living symbol of the nation's stability and unity. The Tudor monarch, though powerful, often operated within a system that required negotiation and persuasion. The Bourbons, especially Louis XIV, embraced a much more overtly autocratic model. The Sun King deliberately distanced himself from any notion of shared governance. He ruled without a chief minister and expected all decisions to emanate from his person. The monarch was not merely first among equals, but the singular source of law, justice, and authority. This absolutist model held that the king's will was law, and his authority was derived directly from God. Louis's successors attempted to maintain this model, but with diminishing success. Louis XV and Louis XVI faced increasing opposition from parliaments, intellectuals, and reformers who challenged the very foundations of divine right monarchy. The evolution of kingship from absolute rule to more constitutional forms of governance is one of the most significant contrasts between the two dynasties. The Tudors laid the groundwork for a constitutional monarchy, even if unwittingly. By the time the Stuarts succeeded them, the idea that monarchs should govern in partnership with Parliament had taken root. The Glorious Revolution of 1688, just a few decades after Elizabeth's death, formalized this shift, establishing a constitutional monarchy in which the crown was subordinate to the rule of law and parliamentary sovereignty. In contrast, the Bourbons clung to absolutism far longer, resisting calls for reform until the pressures of revolution made change inevitable. By the time of the French Revolution in 1789, the Bourbon monarchy was seen as an outdated relic of a bygone era. The execution of Louis XVI marked not just the end of a reign, but the end of a worldview. The constitutional monarchy briefly established in the Revolution's early years failed to satisfy the demands of the time, and the monarchy itself was abolished. Though the Bourbons would later be restored, their authority was forever diminished. The Tudors and Bourbons both exemplified monarchical power at its most potent, but their strategies and trajectories diverged in telling ways. Both dynasties used religion, law, military strength, and culture to assert control and shape their nations. Both cultivated elaborate images of authority and sought to legitimize their rule through patronage and symbolism. Yet, their views on the nature of kingship and their willingness, or unwillingness, to adapt to changing political realities marked the boundary between enduring influence and catastrophic collapse. The Tudors, by balancing authority with political astuteness, laid the groundwork for a monarchy that could evolve. The Bourbons, by clinging too rigidly to divine right and centralized control, became victims of their own success. The comparison of these dynasties thus offers a rich portrait of power in action, how it is gained, wielded, celebrated, and ultimately, how it must respond to the forces of change. The legacies of the Tudor and Bourbon dynasties are deeply embedded in the cultural, political, and ideological fabric of Europe. Both families ruled during transformative centuries that shaped the trajectory of modern nation-states, defined national identities, and laid the foundation for political systems that still resonate today. Their reigns, spanning the 15th to the 18th centuries, reflect the struggle between absolutist ambition and the forces of institutional and popular resistance. The ways in which these dynasties wielded and maintained power, often with brilliance, at times with brutality, offer a window into the formation of modern governance. Even centuries after their decline, the shadows of the Tudors and Bourbons continue to inform contemporary debates about sovereignty, leadership, and the relationship between rulers and the ruled. The Tudors, beginning with Henry VII in the late 15th century, brought stability to a kingdom fractured by decades of civil war. Emerging from the chaos of the Wars of the Roses, Henry VII secured his rule through strategic marriages, financial acumen, and a carefully constructed image of legitimate kingship. His victory at the Battle of Bosworth in the year 1485 did more than end a war. It marked the beginning of a dynasty that would transform England into a powerful, centralized state. His policies reduced the power of the feudal aristocracy, strengthened royal finances, and restored order to a weary nation. This foundational work provided the platform upon which his successors would build. Henry VIII, arguably the most iconic Tudor monarch, left a legacy that forever altered the political and religious landscape of England. His break with the Roman Catholic Church and the creation of the Church of England were more than personal or theological decisions. They redefined the English monarchy's relationship to religion and established a precedent for royal supremacy over spiritual matters. This move not only allowed Henry to marry and bullion, but also transferred vast wealth from the monasteries to the crown, reshaping the economic foundations of the monarchy. Moreover, the religious schism initiated under Henry set the stage for a century of sectarian conflict and debate, forcing future monarchs to grapple with the question of how closely the crown should be tied to a specific religious tradition. The reign of Elizabeth I cemented the Tudor legacy in both national consciousness and historical imagination. Her ability to navigate religious tension, foreign threats, and internal plots while maintaining a carefully cultivated image of the Virgin Queen ensured her place in history as one of England's greatest monarchs. Under her rule, England experienced a cultural renaissance, with flourishing arts and the beginnings of global exploration. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 became a defining moment of national pride, marking the rise of England as a naval power and reinforcing a sense of insular resilience and divine favor. Elizabeth's legacy is inseparable from the development of a uniquely English identity, one rooted in Protestantism, maritime ambition, and a monarch who symbolized unity and strength. Across the Channel, the Bourbons left an equally formidable legacy, one that would dominate French history for more than 2 centuries. The dynasty's ascent reached its apex under Louis XIV, the so-called Sun King, whose reign from 1643 to 1715 epitomized the concept of absolute monarchy. Louis's famous declaration, "I am the state," captures the ethos of Bourbon rule, a belief in the monarch as the embodiment of national will and divine order. Through meticulous control of court life at Versailles, patronage of the arts, and expansive military campaigns, Louis crafted an image of royal majesty that shaped European politics and culture. The administrative reforms and bureaucratic centralization undertaken during Louis XIV's reign created a model of statecraft that influenced rulers across the continent. The professionalization of the military, the expansion of state institutions, and the codification of legal practices under the Bourbons helped to transform France into a modern state. However, the financial and social costs of these ambitions were immense. By concentrating power so completely in the monarchy and marginalizing traditional checks like the Estates General, the Bourbons sowed the seeds of discontent that would later erupt in revolution. The 18th century saw the beginning of the decline of Bourbon power, as Enlightenment ideals challenged the foundations of divine right and hereditary rule. Philosophers such as Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu critiqued absolutism and advocated for reason, equality, and representative government. The Bourbon response was largely defensive, with Louis XV and Louis XVI attempting limited reforms while preserving the core of royal authority. These half-measures failed to address growing economic inequality, political frustration, and intellectual ferment. When the French Revolution erupted in 1789, it was both a repudiation of Bourbon excess and a testament to the dynasty's central role in shaping the French state. The execution of Louis XVI in 1793 marked a dramatic end to centuries of Bourbon rule. Yet even in death, the Bourbons' legacy persisted. The Revolution and the subsequent rise of Napoleon did not erase the administrative and cultural foundations laid by the Bourbons. Instead, they built upon them, reorganizing France, codifying laws, and expanding state authority in ways that reflected both a break from and continuation of Bourbon governance. The legacy of both the Tudors and Bourbons extends far beyond their own countries. Their reigns influenced the broader development of the modern state system in Europe, particularly in terms of centralized authority, legal standardization, and the interplay between monarchy and nationhood. The Tudor model of constitutional monarchy, with its gradual accommodation of parliamentary authority, contrasted with the Bourbon model of absolutism, which resisted institutional limits until its collapse. These contrasting trajectories offer valuable lessons about the balance of power in governance. In contemporary political discourse, the echoes of Tudor and Bourbon rule are still evident. Debates about the role of tradition, the power of the executive, and the influence of public opinion often draw, knowingly or not, on precedents established in this earlier era. The concept of national identity, for example, is deeply rooted in the policies and imagery cultivated by these dynasties. The Tudors emphasized Englishness through religious independence, cultural flourishing, and maritime exploration. The Bourbons promoted Frenchness through centralized administration, cultural grandeur, and linguistic unification. In both cases, the monarch was not just a ruler, but a symbol of national destiny. These symbolic roles continue to influence the ceremonial aspects of constitutional monarchies today. The British monarchy, a direct descendant of the Tudor tradition, remains a powerful cultural institution even as its political authority has waned. Royal weddings, state ceremonies, and national commemorations all draw on Tudor innovations in image-making and public spectacle. The idea that a monarch can embody the spirit of a people, serve as a unifying figure, and uphold a sense of continuity in turbulent times is a direct inheritance from this era. France, though a republic since the 19th century, still grapples with the legacy of its Bourbon past. The centralized administrative structures, the grandeur of state rituals, and even the architectural dominance of Paris reflect the imprint of Bourbon ambitions. Debates over secularism, the role of the state in public life, and the memory of revolution are all shaped by the historical experiences of royal absolutism and its dramatic overthrow. Moreover, the tension between centralized authority and public participation, a central theme in both Tudor and Bourbon rule, remains a defining challenge in modern politics. Leaders across the globe continue to wrestle with how to wield executive power responsibly, how to balance tradition with innovation, and how to maintain legitimacy in the eyes of a diverse and often divided populace. The strategies employed by the Tudors and Bourbons offer both cautionary tales and inspiring examples. Henry VII's meticulous consolidation of power, Elizabeth's skillful diplomacy, Louis XIV's cultural magnificence, and Louis XVI's tragic indecision, all illustrate the perils and possibilities of leadership. The stories of these dynasties also remind us that power is never static. It must be earned, maintained, and adapted. The Tudors succeeded, in part, because they understood the need for compromise, spectacle, and institutional support. The Bourbons fell, in part, because they underestimated the capacity of their subjects to demand change. The enduring relevance of these lessons lies in their applicability to any political system, whether monarchical, republican, or otherwise. Understanding the rise and fall of powerful dynasties helps us to recognize the patterns of political success and failure in our own time. In today's world, where the concentration of power in executive branches continues to provoke debate, the example of Tudor and Bourbon rule invites reflection. What does it mean for a leader to embody the state? How should institutions constrain authority without paralyzing governance? When does tradition serve the public good, and when does it become a barrier to progress? These questions are not new. They have been asked for centuries, and the experiences of early modern Europe offer profound insights into their resolution. Furthermore, the cultural legacies of these dynasties continue to shape global perceptions of art, authority, and identity. The Elizabethan era remains a touchstone for English cultural pride, with Shakespeare's works still performed around the world and Elizabeth's image continuing to symbolize intelligence and resilience. Versailles stands as a monument to the heights and excesses of royal ambition, attracting millions of visitors and serving as a backdrop for reflections on power, beauty, and inequality. Educational curricula, public monuments, historical dramas, and scholarly research all keep the memory of the Tudors and Bourbons alive. They are not merely subjects of historical interest, but enduring reference points in the collective imagination. Their lives and legacies are reenacted on screen, studied in classrooms, and debated in public forums. In this sense, they continue to wield a kind of soft power, influencing how people think about leadership, identity, and history itself. The study of the Tudor and Bourbon dynasties is not only a journey into the past, but a mirror reflecting contemporary concerns. As societies around the world navigate the complexities of authority, legitimacy, and national identity, the experiences of these royal houses offer both inspiration and warning. They remind us that power, while alluring and often effective, carries profound responsibilities. They show us that leadership must be responsive to change, attentive to the needs of the people, and grounded in a vision that transcends personal ambition. By understanding how the Tudors and Bourbons rose to greatness, how they maintained their grip on power, and how they ultimately faced decline, we are better equipped to evaluate the leaders of our own time. We can appreciate the value of institutional resilience, the importance of cultural investment, and the danger of ignoring the voices of ordinary people. In doing so, we ensure that the study of history remains not just an academic exercise, but a vital tool for building a more just, thoughtful, and informed world.